Beneath layers of volcanic ash and time, there once existed cities that shimmered like black mirrors under the sun. Built from the cooled breath of the earth, Obsidian, these civilizations shaped stone with precision that still puzzles modern science. Their temples reflected the sky, their knives cut with molecular sharpness, and their mirrors captured both starlight and prophecy. Across Mexico, Guatemala, and beyond, traces of this forgotten mastery remain buried in tunnels, carved into pyramids, and scattered through museum vaults around the world. This is the story of how entire societies turned molten fire into geometry, reflection, and power. Join us as we walk through the glass mountains, descend beneath the earth, and uncover the silent engineers who taught stone to remember light. The Obsidian cities. In the highlands of central Mexico, the morning fog often hangs low over the dark ridges of ancient volcanic rock. Beneath that mist, archaeologists have uncovered vast networks of cities built from a single material, obsidian. To most, obsidian is a glassy black stone used for blades or jewelry. To the civilizations of the ancient Americas, it was something far more. It was both mirror and weapon, symbol and substance, as sharp as thought itself. From these gleaming stones rose cities whose builders shaped rock as if they understood its molecular structure, long before the language of science existed. One of these places lies not far from modern-day Puebla. Its local name is derived from the Nahuatl word Itzcuinapan, place of obsidian. Layers of volcanic glass run beneath the earth there, and the people who lived above it seemed to sense the material's power. They carved entire courtyards from it, not polished smooth, but left raw and light-absorbing. Under the sun, the ground itself shimmered with reflections that distorted shapes and people. Spanish chroniclers later wrote that those who entered such plazas could not tell if they were surrounded by walls or by their own reflections. By 600 BCE, obsidian was already traded across Mesoamerica. Excavations at Teotihuacan revealed workshops filled with fragments, blades, and discarded cores from the volcanic fields of Pachuca and Otumba. Some of these blades measure thinner than a modern surgical scalpel. They were not made with metal, nor by random fracture, but by pressure flaking so precise that microscopic examination shows near-perfect control of force. It is said that an expert craftsman could separate a flake less than a millimeter thick, using only bone and wood tools. When viewed under a microscope, the edge is molecularly straight, something modern engineers still study. In 1998, a team led by Dr. Patricia Anna Walt analyzed residues found on several obsidian knives from a burial near San Lorenzo. They found traces of cinnabar and hematite, suggesting these blades were used in both ceremonial and technical contexts, cutting pigments, shaping fibers, and even performing medical procedures. An early Spanish physician, Francisco Hernandez, wrote in 1571 that the Mexica surgeons used black glass sharper than any iron to open abscesses and cut flesh with no tearing. The fusion of ritual and precision seemed inseparable in this culture. To cut with obsidian was to cross a threshold between body and spirit, life and afterlife. In Guatemala, the city of Caminaljuyu, now buried beneath the modern capital, once glittered with obsidian markets. Every fragment carried value. Archaeologists mapped over 40 separate workshop zones, all devoted to the crafting of blades, mirrors, and projectile points. Yet among them, a smaller area revealed something stranger: thick slabs, polished to an almost liquid finish, forming what looked like doorways. Some scholars called them ritual mirrors. Others suggested they were early instruments of astronomy. When positioned at specific angles, they reflected the sky and allowed the observation of stars during daylight. In 2003, a discovery in the valley of Oaxaca deepened the mystery. Excavators found a subterranean chamber with a single obsidian disc mounted on a clay platform. Around it were clay figurines, each missing their eyes. The alignment of the disk pointed to the zenith passage of the sun, an event occurring twice each year in the tropics. The builders, it seemed, used the darkness of obsidian to mark the brightness of the heavens. The stone that swallowed light was also the key to measuring it. Further north, near modern Zacatecas, researchers studying the Chalchihuites culture uncovered entire walls made of obsidian flakes, cemented with volcanic ash. When torches were lit, the city glowed faintly, each wall catching the light in fragments. The inhabitants may have believed that the city itself was alive, its black surfaces breathing fire when illuminated. In one chamber, explorers found something unsettling, a human skeleton surrounded by hundreds of tiny polished obsidian spheres. The arrangement matched no known burial custom. Some anthropologists speculate that the orbs represented the eyes of a deity, each reflecting the one who looked upon them. The Aztec capital, Tenochtitlan, would later inherit this legacy. The word for obsidian, Itzli, was also the name of a god, a divine blade, sharp and watchful. In the codices, he is drawn with black skin and a mouth shaped like a knife. Temples dedicated to him were lined with obsidian mosaics, so polished that flames and faces seemed to move across them. Spanish accounts mention that during certain nights, priests carried obsidian mirrors to the temple roofs, claiming they could see the future in them. Bernal Diaz del Castillo wrote, "They gazed into the black mirror and spoke of men coming from the east, shining like the sun." One mirror survives today. It rests in the British Museum, labeled Obsidian Mirror, Mexico, 1400-1521 CE. Its surface is flawless, curved slightly inward. When viewed at the correct angle, it magnifies the viewer's face. This mirror once belonged to John Dee, the 16th century English alchemist and advisor to Queen Elizabeth I. Dee believed it allowed him to communicate with angels. He called it his shoestone. He never knew its origin. To him, it was a gift of otherworldly knowledge. To the Mexica, it was the face of a god. Modern researchers continue to study the material properties of ancient obsidian artifacts. Spectrographic analysis shows that certain Mesoamerican samples contain trace amounts of iron and manganese, giving them unique reflective qualities. Others, from highland sources, exhibit isotopic ratios suggesting thermal treatment, ancient heat treating to increase translucency. Some even bear microscopic striations consistent with rotary polishing, implying a method unknown to official records. The builders had mastered a medium that demands precision at the atomic level. In 2017, satellite imaging near the volcanic field of Cerro de las Navajas revealed subsurface anomalies, rectilinear outlines extending for several kilometers. Excavation was limited, but ground-penetrating radar detected dense clusters of obsidian beneath sediment layers dated to over 3,000 years old. If these were foundations, they predate Teotihuacan itself. One archaeologist remarked that it looked as if a city was built of glass and buried before history began. In the legends of central Mexico, there is mention of Itzlan, a land of shining towers that could cut the sky. The word reappears across centuries, from Aztec oral stories to colonial-era chronicles. Some say it was metaphor, a myth of light and reflection. Others suspect it refers to an actual city, consumed by volcanic eruption, preserved beneath obsidian flow. Geologists near the Trans-Mexican volcanic belt have identified entire strata, where ash and glass have fused into solid black fields, so thick that ground-penetrating signals cannot pass through. Every fragment of obsidian still carries heat within it, trapped since the moment it cooled from lava. When held under light, it absorbs and releases that glow slowly, as if remembering. The ancients shaped that memory into tools, temples, and mirrors. They carved time itself into stone. The glass mountains, Long before the word obsidian appeared in European texts, the mountains that produced it were already known as sacred places. Across the ancient world, these black volcanic ridges marked boundaries between the living and the divine. In Mesoamerica, they were called Itztepetl glass mountains. To the peoples who lived nearby, they were more than geology. They were the breathing lungs of the earth, where molten light hardened into stone. Every tool, blade, and mirror made from their glass was a fragment of fire made solid. One of the most studied sources lies near Pachuca, northeast of the Valley of Mexico. The mountain, Sierra de las Navajas, Ridge of the Knives, rises over 2,000 meters, its slopes scattered with old mining pits. Radiocarbon studies suggest humans were extracting obsidian there as early as 900 BCE. Excavations have revealed hundreds of quarry sites and workshops where rough nodules were brought up, split by hammerstones, and carried to distant cities. The mountain's distinctive greenish tint became a kind of signature. When a blade of Pachuca obsidian was found far from home, it could be traced like a fingerprint across ancient trade routes. Trade networks spread these green blades to Teotihuacan, Monte Alban, and even as far as the Maya lowlands. At Tikal, fragments from Pachuca have been recovered inside royal tombs dated to the 4th century CE. Their color was not random. Ancient texts associate the green-black hue with life, breath, and renewal, the same qualities linked to the god Quetzalcoatl. For that reason, blades from the glass mountain were often placed beside the mouths of the dead. They were believed to open a path for the spirit to breathe once more. Not all mountains produced the same kind of glass. Near Ucario in Michoacán, the rock cooled slower, creating deep grey obsidian with faint blue reflections. These pieces were preferred for mirrors. The slopes are still littered with flakes, evidence of massive production. A 2014 field study estimated that in the late Classic period, Ucario alone supplied nearly 40% of central Mexico's obsidian mirrors. Many were exported unfinished, to be polished elsewhere using volcanic ash and water over weeks. Archaeologists reconstructing one mirror reported that each surface required over 70 hours of hand polishing to reach a reflective sheen. Further south, in Guatemala's highlands, Mount El Chayal fed an entire economy. The Maya built villages around its base, where tunnels still wind into the earth. The obsidian here is almost pure black, fine-grained and brittle. Its flakes cut easily, ideal for ritual blades. Mayan scribes recorded its use in ceremonies dedicated to lightning gods. One inscription from Copan refers to the night stone that carries fire. When Spanish chroniclers later described the process of cutting offerings, they noted that the priests preferred this material over metal, saying it was the stone that never rusts. In the deserts of eastern Anatolia, halfway across the world, similar mountains existed. Near Mount Nemrut and the ancient settlement of Chayonu, Neolithic people used obsidian from nearby volcanoes to make tools as early as 8000 BCE. The glass was darker than that of the Americas, almost opaque. When polished, it reflected faint red hues. Archaeologists discovered caches of obsidian blades inside early houses, suggesting they were stored as wealth. Some pieces were carried hundreds of kilometers to sites like Jericho and Çatalhöyük. The trade paths were so consistent that scholars once mapped prehistoric exchange networks purely through obsidian composition. Each mountain carried its own isotopic signature, a chemical map of the Earth's memory. One of the strangest geological formations lies in Armenia, where the Gegama Range still bears scars of ancient glass mining. The locals call the area Sev Sar, meaning Black Mountain. Here, obsidian veins run through frozen lava flows. When sunlight passes over them, the ridges gleam as if wet. The obsidian from this region was used for both weapons and architecture. A few kilometers away, archaeologists found polished slabs fitted into the walls of a megalithic structure now known as Zorat's Kara, sometimes called the Armenian Stonehenge. Its alignment to solstices and the discovery of obsidian shards within its chambers suggest a dual purpose, astronomical and ritual. Back in the Americas, certain volcanic regions carried reputations that transcended local geography. The people of Teotihuacan, whose city flourished between 100 BCE and 550 CE, considered obsidian a divine material. They built workshops near the glass mountains, but also established colonies close to distant sources. Archaeologists refer to these settlements as mining enclaves. One such site, known as Ozchuma, lies more than 100 kilometers from the capital. There, excavators found figurines, altars, and tools identical to those in Teotihuacan, suggesting direct control. The miners were not mere laborers. They lived under religious supervision, perhaps believing their work sustained cosmic balance. In 2007, researchers using satellite imaging detected vast obsidian scatters across the slopes of Cerro de las Navajas. Some clusters formed straight lines, visible only from the air. The alignment corresponds roughly with the rising of the Pleiades, an event marked in Mesoamerica as the renewal of the sun. Whether intentional or coincidental, the pattern echoes a recurring theme: mountains as both sources of material and markers of celestial rhythm. The builders seem to shape not only stone, but time itself, embedding cosmology into geography. The process of extraction was quiet and methodical. Workers would heat the stone with fire, then cool it with water to fracture it cleanly. The soundstone cracking in the cold night air was described by later Nahua storytellers as the earth speaking. At dawn, shards were gathered and carried down in woven baskets. Along the trade routes, pack animals and porters followed narrow paths, leaving behind trails still visible today as faint lines across volcanic slopes. Each fragment that reached a workshop or market was a piece of a distant mountain, its origin known by color and sheen alone. Even centuries after the civilizations faded, these mountains continued to draw attention. During the colonial period, Spanish explorers mistook obsidian for a form of low-grade gem. They attempted to quarry it for European trade, but the glass proved too brittle for transport. In local villages, however, the tradition of shaping it never stopped. Knives, arrowheads, and ornaments are still made near Pachuca and Ucario using ancient methods: hammerstone, pressure flake, water polish. In their shine, one can still see the memory of the glass mountains, the volcanic forges that gave birth to cities of mirror and blade. The mirror makers. In the quiet outskirts of ancient Teotihuacan, archaeologists have uncovered entire districts devoted to a single task: the crafting of mirrors. These were not made of metal or polished bronze, but from the volcanic glass drawn from the surrounding mountains. The workshops were small and dimly lit, with fragments of obsidian scattered like dark water across the floor. The craftsmen who worked here were not ordinary artisans. Their work required patience that bordered on ritual, precision so exact that even the smallest fracture could destroy days of labor. In the surviving fragments of obsidian mirrors, one can still see the lines of pressure and heat, the silent record of human touch repeated over centuries. Excavations led by René Milon in the 1970 seconds revealed concentrations of mirror fragments within Teotihuacan's Street of the Dead complex. Many of these were round, measuring between 10 and 20 centimeters across. They had once been mounted on wooden or stone frames, traces of which still remained in the surrounding soil. One mirror, found near the Temple of the Feathered Serpent, was so finely polished that it still reflected after 1,500 years. Its surface had darkened with time, but when illuminated from above, it returned a perfect, cold glimmer. To make such a mirror, The artisan began with a block of raw obsidian. The outer crust, dull and porous, was chipped away using hammerstones until the inner glass was exposed. The craftsman then shaped the disc by percussion, reducing it gradually through hundreds of strikes. Once the rough form was achieved, it was ground with sand and water over a flat stone. This process could take weeks. The final polish came from a mixture of volcanic ash, hematite, and animal fat, applied with a strip of leather until the surface achieved a flawless reflection. Each mirror, scholars believe, was not only a technical triumph, but a sacred act, an imitation of the sun itself. At Teotihuacan, mirrors appear frequently in murals. Priests are shown holding them before their faces, sometimes within serpentine frames. Others depict warriors wearing small mirrors on their chests, like heart-shaped shields. Some archaeologists interpret these as symbols of divine sight, the ability to perceive both the physical and the invisible. In one mural fragment, a black disc rests behind the head of a figure whose body is covered in feathers. The image recalls later depictions of Quetzalcoatl, suggesting continuity between mirror, god, and celestial order. In Maya regions, mirrors were often buried with the dead. At Tikal, Palenque, and Copan, archaeologists have found them placed over the chest or near the face of royal burials. One mirror, discovered in Tomb 12 of Copan's Acropolis, measured nearly 30 centimeters in diameter and was surrounded by jade beads. The residue analysis revealed traces of cinnabar, a red mercury compound used in funerary rituals. Inscriptions refer to these objects as windows of the soul. A translation from a glyphic panel at Palenque reads, "He gazed into the dark sun and spoke to those beyond." To the Maya, the mirror was not an ornament, it was an opening. Some mirrors were deliberately blackened by heat to reduce reflection, turning them into deep pools that absorbed rather than returned light. When placed in temples or caves, they acted as portals of divination. The priest or scribe would stare into the darkness until the boundary between reflection and vision dissolved. In the Popol Vuh, a sacred Quiche text, there is a passage describing the creator gods shaping men from the face of obsidian, where thoughts are seen. This connection between mind, vision, and stone persisted for millennia, passing from artisan to priest, from priest to ruler. The Aztecs would inherit this entire legacy. Their chronicles speak of Itztli mirrors used by rulers and sorcerers alike. The most famous belonged to Tezcatlipoca, the smoking mirror, one of the 4 creator gods. His name itself means the one with the shining mirror. In Aztec temples, priests carried polished discs of obsidian during ceremonies, lifting them toward the night sky. The reflection of firelight across their surfaces symbolized the movement of stars and destiny. When Hernán Cortés arrived in 1519, indigenous chroniclers wrote that omens had been seen in mirrors, horses galloping across black glass, ships emerging from clouds of smoke. In the 16th century, one of these mirrors crossed the ocean. It arrived in England through Spanish collectors and eventually found its way into the hands of John Dee, the mathematician and astrologer to Queen Elizabeth I. He believed the mirror could summon angels. The artifact, now in the British Museum, has been tested and confirmed to be of Mexican origin, likely from the late Aztec period. Its surface, slightly concave, produces a deep reflection that seems to draw light inward. Dee's assistant, Edward Kelly, described gazing into it for hours, claiming to see figures like bright clouds that spoke with soundless lips. Neither of them could have known that their shoe stone was the same material used in Teotihuacan 1,000 years earlier. Modern analysis of ancient mirrors reveals clues to their sophistication. Under microscopic study, many surfaces display striations consistent with mechanical polishing, yet no known tools existed for such consistency. Some mirrors show evidence of localized heat treatment, as if craftsmen understood that controlled heating could relieve internal stress within the glass. The level of precision required rivals that of modern optical grinding. Scientists from the Universidad Nacional Autónoma de Mexico conducted experiments in 2019 replicating the process, concluding that ancient Mesoamerican artisans achieved optical finishes with techniques still poorly understood. Outside Mesoamerica, other civilizations mirrored this practice, sometimes literally. In ancient Anatolia and Mesopotamia, fragments of volcanic glass mirrors have been found in temples, though smaller in size. Egyptian artisans used obsidian for ceremonial blades, but rarely for mirrors, preferring bronze. Yet the symbolic association between reflection and divinity persisted across cultures. The mirror was always a threshold between human and divine, knowledge and illusion. When the last obsidian mirror was sealed in an Aztec temple before the fall of Tenochtitlan, it may have been meant to capture a final reflection of the world as it was. Centuries later, when archaeologists brushed away the dust from those black discs, they saw their own faces gazing back through the glass modern eyes, meeting ancient light frozen in stone. The mirror makers, long vanished, had left behind not words or monuments, but perfect circles of silence that still see. Blades of light. When obsidian cools from volcanic fire, it hardens not like stone, but like frozen light. The fracture it creates when struck is unlike any other material on Earth, smooth, fluid, and sharp, down to the molecular level. Under magnification, an obsidian edge can reach less than 1/1000th of a millimeter thick, finer than the edge of a modern scalpel. To the ancient civilizations who worked it, this property made the glass sacred. Every cut was both practical and symbolic, dividing flesh, fabric, or fiber, but also dividing the realms of the seen and unseen. In the Valley of Mexico, long before the rise of the Aztecs, obsidian knives were essential tools of life and death. Archaeologists at Teotihuacan have uncovered hundreds of blades arranged beside altars, many unused, their edges still gleaming as if newly made. These were not crafted for combat, but for ceremony. One discovery, made in 1989 near the Pyramid of the Moon, revealed 20 obsidian knives placed around the skeletons of bound animals. Each blade was aligned toward the center, forming a radial pattern that may have represented rays of the sun. The cuts made with these tools were so clean that modern forensic tests found minimal tearing in the preserved tissue, a level of precision modern surgeons would recognize. Among the Aztec, these knives were known as tecpatl. They appear in codices and carvings, often as symbols of sacrifice and cosmic renewal. In the Codex Mendoza, priests are shown holding curved obsidian blades above bowls, their faces calm. One passage describes how the gods themselves opened the heart of the earth with the knife of shining stone. The blade was not viewed as an instrument of cruelty, but as a key that kept the universe balanced. To cut was to release energy, what the Nahua called tonali, the vital warmth within all living beings. At the Templo Mayor in Tenochtitlan, thousands of obsidian fragments have been unearthed from the floors of ritual chambers. Many are thin slivers, some as long as a hand, others almost invisible against the dust. Microscopic examination shows traces of iron oxide and human protein residues. These were working tools, used in surgical precision by priests trained since childhood. Spanish chroniclers wrote that certain rituals required the removal of the heart in a single motion, without hesitation. The black blade entered between ribs and exited without breaking. The incision was so fine that it often surprised the observers, described by one conquistador as a cut too clean for stone. Outside of ritual, obsidian served a different but equally refined purpose. Medicine. Accounts from the 16th century record that Aztec surgeons used obsidian scalpels to treat infections, remove cysts, and perform amputations. The physician Francisco Hernandez, who studied native practices between 1570 and 1577, noted that Their knives, being of black glass, are more apt for surgery than our own of iron. Modern experiments confirm this. In controlled conditions, obsidian blades produce incisions with minimal tissue trauma, leading to faster healing. In the 1,970 seconds, a few experimental surgeons in the United States even tested handcrafted obsidian scalpels on human skin. The results were remarkable under electron microscopes. The wounds showed less cellular damage than those made by steel. Beyond Mesoamerica, the same material carried a different meaning. In ancient Mesopotamia, small obsidian blades were found inside clay jars, dated to around 3000 BCE. Their edges show traces of organic residue, suggesting they were used in early embalming or surgical practices. In Neolithic Anatolia, the inhabitants of Çatalhöyük produced blades identical in form to those of the Americas, long, tapered, translucent. Archaeologists discovered caches of these tools buried beneath house floors, as if preserved for ritual use. It is uncertain whether this parallel arose by coincidence or from a shared understanding of obsidian's nature. In both cases, it functioned as a link between body and earth, between healing and sacrifice. The Maya, too, used obsidian blades with equal skill. At Copan, researchers discovered a surgical toolkit made of obsidian, including scalpels and lancets stored in ceramic jars. Nearby inscriptions suggest these instruments were used in bloodletting ceremonies performed by nobles. Bloodletting for the Maya was not symbolic suffering, it was communication. The release of blood was thought to open a passage to the spirit world, and the cleaner the incision, the clearer the connection. Female rulers such as Lady Zuk of Yaxchilan are depicted drawing thin obsidian blades across their tongues, their eyes half closed in trance. The act combined physical precision with spiritual intent. Even in warfare, obsidian was not used recklessly. The famous Macuahutil, a wooden club lined with obsidian blades, was capable of decapitating a horse, according to Spanish accounts. Yet those same blades shattered easily. Warriors carried multiple replacements, fitting new ones into the grooves of the weapon after battle. Every fragment lost on the field glimmered like broken glass in the sunlight, a reminder that victory came from delicate control rather than brute force. Recent studies reveal that Mesoamerican craftsmen may have developed heat treatment techniques to modify the glass's internal structure. In 2011, researchers at the Instituto de Geofísica in Mexico City analyzed samples from Ucareo and Pachuca, noting subtle changes in silica crystallization that occur only through controlled heating between 200 and 400 degrees Celsius. This suggests that ancient artisans deliberately improved the fracture quality of their material, achieving consistent, predictable results. It was not accidental skill, it was early materials science. In the 21st century, obsidian scalpels are still occasionally used in experimental surgery. Though brittle and impractical for everyday use, they remain the sharpest cutting tools ever created by human hands. What began as volcanic fire became the means to separate tissue, heal wounds, and define the border between life and death. Under the microscope, the edge of an obsidian blade appears endless, so fine it seems to vanish. To hold one is to understand why the ancients considered it alive. The black glass catches light, turns it to silver, and divides it again. It cuts not by force, but by perfection. Cities of shadow. Across the volcanic plains of ancient Mesoamerica, there once stood cities that shimmered like black glass beneath the sun. Built near sources of obsidian, these settlements seemed to merge with the mountains that birthed them, rising from the same molten veins that ran beneath the earth. Archaeologists have called them cities of shadow, not because they were dark in spirit, but because their walls absorbed light. Even after centuries of ruin, when the sun sets on Teotihuacan or Caminaljuyu, fragments of obsidian still glint among the stones, like pieces of night trapped in the ground. The earliest of these obsidian cities emerged during the formative period, around 1200 BCE. In the central valleys of Mexico, communities began building their homes from volcanic tuff and embedding obsidian flakes into plastered walls. This practice was more than decoration. The reflective surfaces served to catch light inside temples and homes, creating a living rhythm of shadow and flame. When torches moved across them, the glass flickered like stars. Excavations at Chalcatzingo, in Morelos, revealed several dwellings lined with thin obsidian plates pressed into wet clay, suggesting that these cities were designed to glow from within. By the time Teotihuacan rose to prominence around 100 BCE, obsidian had become the city's lifeblood. The entire economy of the metropolis, spanning more than 20 square kilometers and home to over 100,000 inhabitants, depended on its trade. From the nearby Sierra de las Navajas mines, obsidian was hauled by caravan to the city's workshops. There, thousands of artisans crafted blades, arrow points, mirrors, and ornaments for export across Mesoamerica. Archaeological surveys have mapped hundreds of obsidian working compounds concentrated in the city's northern district. Each neighborhood specialized in a particular form. Some produced utilitarian tools, others ceremonial mirrors. Together, they formed an industrial system unmatched in the pre-Columbian world. When sunlight struck the temple of the feathered serpent, the facade appeared to ripple. Beneath the limestone carvings, traces of obsidian inlay have been found in the serpent's eyes and scales. Scholars believe these details once reflected the rising sun during the equinox, animating the temple with fire. The city itself was organized as a cosmic map, the avenue of the dead aligned with the Pleiades, the pyramids marking the paths of the sun and moon. Obsidian, in this layout, acted as the city's pulse, a dark mirror that linked heaven, earth, and the underworld. South of Mexico, in the highlands of Guatemala, similar obsidian cities emerged. Caminaljuyu, near modern Guatemala City, was one of the largest. During its height, around 400 BCE, the settlement contained massive platforms, reservoirs, and a network of causeways lined with obsidian markers. Excavations in the 1940s uncovered caches of obsidian blades buried under cornerstones, perhaps offerings to stabilize structures against earthquakes. Nearby, workshops filled with discarded flakes indicated mass production, with artisans recycling fragments into needles and scrapers. The glass was treated with the same reverence as gold, in later civilizations, a sacred material that held both economic and spiritual weight. The Maya integrated obsidian into nearly every aspect of architecture and ritual. In the city of Copan, temple stairs have been found embedded with small obsidian discs that shimmer when illuminated. At Tikal, archaeologists discovered a subterranean passage lined with black glass fragments, possibly meant to simulate the night sky. When firelight entered the passage, it scattered into thousands of reflections, creating the illusion of motion, an artificial firmament beneath the ground. The builders seemed to design their spaces to hold both darkness and reflection, as if understanding that light was only meaningful when broken. In 2015, a LiDAR survey of the Guatemalan jungle revealed over 60,000 previously unknown structures, many located near obsidian sources. Some of these sites, such as El Mirador and Nakbe, showed concentrations of obsidian higher than any other material, suggesting entire cities were built as distribution centers. The scale of trade was immense. From these centers, obsidian traveled by river and road to distant cultures, the Zapotec, the Mixtec, and the Tarascan. In the process, it became a currency of its own, measured by weight and color. The blacker and clearer the glass, the more it was worth. To the east, in the volcanic ranges of El Salvador, the ancient city of San Andres thrived near the Ilopango caldera. In 539 CE, that volcano erupted violently, covering the city in ash. Excavations have uncovered streets preserved under the layer, with obsidian flakes still visible on workbenches. The eruption that destroyed the city also renewed its resource. Centuries later, new settlers returned to mine the freshly exposed glass. The landscape itself participated in the cycle of creation, and collapse fire gave stone, and stone built cities, which fire reclaimed. Obsidian's presence was not confined to monumental architecture. Even domestic spaces carried traces of it. Household shrines often contained small obsidian mirrors or blades wrapped in cloth. In Teotihuacan's residential compounds, offerings of obsidian were found beneath floors and thresholds, possibly to protect the inhabitants. The act of embedding sharp glass beneath one's home symbolized both defense and continuity. The material could cut, but it could also connect. One of the most unusual discoveries came from the site of Cantona, in Puebla. Built between 600 and 1000 CE, the city contained over 24 ball courts and a vast network of paved streets. Its defensive walls were made not of stone blocks but of loose volcanic glass. Millions of small obsidian fragments were packed into the walls, producing a surface that sparkled at dawn and dusk. The effect must have been otherworldly, an entire fortress glowing black and silver as the sun moved. When night fell, torches reflected along the walls like rivers of light. Obsidian shaped not just architecture, but social order. Those who controlled its trade-controlled power. In Teotihuacan, elites likely monopolized access to the Sierra de las Navajas mines. Glyphs on later Aztec manuscripts depict these mines guarded by serpentine deities, suggesting divine sanction over extraction. Even after the city's collapse, centuries later, its legacy endured. The Aztecs traced their own lineage to those who ruled the Glass Mountain. A phrase, scholars believe, refers to the miners and builders of Teotihuacan. To walk through these ruins today is to step into a landscape that still reflects. In the quiet hours before sunrise, when light touches the black shards scattered among the dust, the cities appear to wake again. The shadows move across them, as if guided by memory by the same forces that once taught their builders to shape volcanoes into mirrors and homes into constellations of glass. The trade of night. For thousands of years, obsidian moved quietly through the world, carried on the backs of traders, floated down rivers, and buried in ports now lost beneath dust. Its path can still be traced by the unique chemical signature of each volcanic source, like fingerprints etched in stone. Archaeologists call this pattern the Black Trail, a record of movement that links distant peoples across continents and time. Wherever this glass appeared, civilization soon followed. In the highlands of central Mexico, trade in obsidian began as early as 1500 BCE. The volcanic ridges of Pachuca, Ucareo, and Otumba became extraction zones, each with distinct colors, green, gray, or jet black. From these mountains, traders traveled through the valleys with baskets of cut cores and blades, following routes that paralleled ancient riverbeds. At Teotihuacan, obsidian was currency as much as tool. Excavations of its markets reveal standardized blade cores, stacked in bundles, exchanged for maize, textiles, and cacao. The archaeologist George Cowgill once described the city as a machine built on glass. The flow of obsidian determined its rise and sustained its empire. Beyond the basin of Mexico, trade expanded southward. By 600 BCE, Maya cities such as Caminaljuyu and Tikal were importing large quantities of green obsidian from Pachuca, more than 800 kilometers away. Isotopic analysis confirms that over 80% of the obsidian in lowland Maya sites originated from central Mexican sources. These networks required coordination, protection, and trust. Obsidian was brittle. A single misstep could shatter a blade worth weeks of labor. To transport it safely, traders wrapped the glass in woven reeds and coated it with resin. Entire caravans moved slowly across the forests, guided by rivers and celestial markers. In the Zapotec city of Monte Alban, obsidian reached ritual status, Temples contained caches of imported glass buried beneath foundation stones. Its arrival marked alliances and tribute, not conquest. Inscriptions show symbols for black stone associated with rulers' names, proof that the trade in obsidian was as political as it was economic. When relations between cities collapsed, the glass flow stopped. The resulting shortages often coincided with periods of warfare and migration. Farther south, in Costa Rica and Colombia, isolated fragments of Mexican and Guatemalan obsidian have been found along coastal settlements. This discovery suggests the existence of maritime trade routes. Lightweight bundles of obsidian could have been loaded onto reed or balsa rafts, traveling along the Pacific coast. Modern experiments show that such journeys, though slow, were possible with seasonal currents. If so, obsidian was among the earliest goods to connect Mesoamerica to the Greater Americas by sea. At the same time, on the opposite side of the world, another network of glass was forming. In the Near East, Anatolia's obsidian sources like Nemrut Dağ and Bingöl supplied the earliest Neolithic communities. At Çatalhöyük, thousands of blades, cores, and arrow points have been uncovered, their edges still sharp after 9,000 years. These artifacts traveled as far as the Levant and Mesopotamia, reaching sites such as Jericho and Tel Brak. Analysis by the British Museum in 2016 confirmed that many of Jericho's tools came from a single mountain in eastern Turkey. This meant that, even in 7000 BCE, people were transporting obsidian over 600 kilometers centuries before the invention of the wheel. In the Aegean, the island of Melos became another hub. Its quarry at Starlight produced obsidian used by Cycladic islanders to make tools, jewelry, and arrowheads. Maritime archaeologists have traced Melian obsidian across Crete, the Greek mainland, and even Egypt. Each fragment represents a trade route, a silent record of travel long before written history. By 3000 BCE, obsidian had become one of humanity's first global materials, its movement shaping the spread of agriculture, metallurgy, and navigation. In Mesoamerica, the trade continued to evolve. The decline of Teotihuacan around 550 CE disrupted long-distance routes, but obsidian commerce quickly reorganized under regional powers. The Toltecs of Tula, followed by the Aztecs of Tenochtitlan, established state control over mining zones. Tribute lists, recorded in the Codex Mendoza, show quantities of obsidian blades delivered from conquered provinces every 80 days. These were stored in armories and workshops, distributed for warfare, ritual, and construction. The Spanish conquerors noted that even the most common household tools, knives, scrapers, needles, were made from the same volcanic glass once used for sacrifice. In 1995, archaeologist Michael D. Glasscock conducted one of the largest obsidian sourcing studies in history, analyzing thousands of artifacts from across the Americas. The results revealed intricate webs of trade that extended thousands of kilometers. A single blade found in a Guatemalan tomb could be traced back to Pachuca. A fragment discovered in Belize matched the composition of Ucareo. The pattern suggested an unbroken chain of movement connecting hundreds of cities. This was commerce conducted without beasts of burden, without metal coins carried only by human endurance and faith in exchange. What made obsidian so universally valued was not only its utility, but its symbolism. In nearly every culture that used it, the glass was linked with transformation, fire turning to stone, darkness becoming light. To trade obsidian was to share the essence of volcanoes. Traders who carried it were sometimes seen as mediators between gods and men. In Aztec society, merchants known as Pochteca traveled vast distances under divine protection, their caravans moving silently through the highlands. At night, when campfires reflected on the blades they carried, the travelers said they saw stars shimmering within them, a reminder of their bond to the mountains of fire. As European contact disrupted these ancient economies, obsidian's value declined. Iron replaced it in warfare and agriculture, yet even then, the glass retained its mystery. Spanish chroniclers noted that natives continued to keep small obsidian mirrors hidden inside homes for memory of the old gods. They were relics of a world where trade was not only economic, but cosmological, a movement of energy, belief, and molten earth. Today, scientists use neutron activation analysis to map obsidian's origins with extraordinary precision. Each shard tells where it was born and how far it traveled. When plotted on maps, these paths converge into something vast and unexpected, a shadow network stretching from the highlands of Turkey to the valleys of Mexico, from early farmers to city builders. It is a record of human connection written in glass, a memory of night that crossed oceans and epochs. The trade of obsidian ended when metal took its place, but the trails it left beneath soil and ash still glisten under excavation lamps. To follow them is to trace the first global system, one that moved not in gold or silver, but in the dark glow of volcanic glass. Temples of reflection. In the ancient world, certain places were built not only to shelter worship, but to capture light. Across the highlands of Mesoamerica, architects used obsidian as if it were a part of the sky itself, an element to shape, align, and set within walls, so that temples could breathe with the rhythm of the sun. What remains of these sites are fragments of that intention. Scattered shards that once guided shadows across floors, polished discs that once watched the heavens, and buried mirrors that once faced upward toward the stars. At Teotihuacan, the Pyramid of the Sun still dominates the landscape, but beneath its heavy stone mass lie traces of something more delicate. Archaeologists working in its eastern chamber discovered fragments of obsidian mosaics embedded into plaster. When reassembled, these pieces formed part of a reflective design that once adorned the inner wall. The arrangement aligned precisely with the rising sun during the equinox, allowing morning light to scatter across the chamber in geometric patterns. The builders seemed to understand how to bend illumination through darkness, how to make shadow part of the architecture. Nearby, under the Temple of the Feathered Serpent, excavators led by Sergio Gomez in 2015 found an underground tunnel filled with offerings. Among them were spheres made of pyrite and hundreds of small obsidian mirrors. The objects were placed deliberately to reflect torchlight, creating the illusion of a star-filled corridor. Chemical analysis later revealed traces of mercury pooled in small depressions on the floor, its reflective surface amplifying the effect. Gomez called the chamber a simulation of the cosmos. The people who walked there were not merely entering a tomb, but a reconstruction of the night sky. Farther south, in the Maya city of Palenque, the Temple of the Inscriptions conceals another example of reflective design. Inside the burial chamber of King Pakal, archaeologists identified thin obsidian plates once fitted into niches along the walls. Over centuries, most had fallen, but the pattern remained visible. Light entering from the staircase above would have struck these plates directly, creating a pulse of reflections that moved like water down the corridor. The effect, reconstructed digitally in 2021, reveals a chamber that shimmered with movement each dawn. It was less a tomb than a machine of time, a place where light marked the transition from life to afterlife. In Copan, Honduras, the Temple of the Sun's Eye contains a small circular window cut through a wall lined with obsidian tiles. At specific times of the year, sunlight passes through this aperture, hitting a stone altar inside. The beam lasts only a few minutes before vanishing. When researchers mapped the event, they discovered that it occurred precisely during the zenith passage of the sun, the moment it stands directly overhead. The obsidian-lined opening was not symbolic, it was an instrument. Through such calibrations, the ancients measured the seasons, aligning rituals with the turning of the year. The use of obsidian within these structures was not purely visual. In some temples, it formed acoustic elements. Excavations at Monte Alban uncovered rows of small obsidian hemispheres embedded along the base of walls. When struck or stepped upon, they resonated faintly, amplifying footsteps with a metallic timbre. The combination of sound and reflection suggests a deliberate sensory design, an architecture that merged light, echo, and ritual. In Guatemala's highlands, caves played a similar role. The ancient Maya viewed them as the mouths of the underworld, places where creation began. Inside these caverns, explorers have found caches of obsidian mirrors arranged in circles. When torches flickered, the discs reflected light in fragmented arcs, transforming darkness into motion. Some caves contain painted ceilings covered in soot, suggesting repeated ceremonies of illumination. The archaeologist James Brady described these spaces as living observatories, where priests measured time by the behavior of flame and shadow on the mirrors. Even outside the Americas, similar principles appeared. In ancient Armenia's Zoratkara, slabs of polished obsidian were fitted into standing stones, enhancing their contrast against the sky. In Anatolia, at the site of Göbekli Tepe, obsidian fragments were placed within carved basins, possibly to hold water for reflective divination. These early builders seemed to share an intuition that reflection was not only visual but spiritual, a way to make visible the patterns of heaven. Returning to Mesoamerica, the relationship between obsidian and divine perception reached its height under the Aztecs. At the Templo Mayor of Tenochtitlan, obsidian adorned altars dedicated to Tezcatlipoca, the smoking mirror. Spanish chroniclers described priests raising mirrors toward the night sky, believing they could read omens in the stars' shifting reflections. One ritual, recorded in the Florentine Codex, involved setting a black mirror into a pool of water, allowing wind to ripple its surface. The resulting distortions were interpreted as messages from the gods, a merging of natural and crafted mirrors, sky, and stone. Modern reconstructions of these sites have revealed a striking pattern. Temples and pyramids containing reflective materials were almost always aligned to celestial events, solstices, equinoxes, or the zenith sun. The interplay of obsidian and sunlight allowed priests to track time without written calendars. When the first beam struck a mirror's edge, it signaled planting season. When it vanished, the harvest. Through reflection, the ancients synchronized their lives with the cosmos. In 2019, laser scanning of the Pyramid of the Moon detected remnants of reflective coating beneath layers of plaster, suggesting that large sections once gleamed in sunlight. If reconstructed, the pyramid would have appeared half luminous, half shadowed, its surface alive with changing brightness. The city's name, Teotihuacan, meaning the place where gods were made, gains new resonance in that context. The gods were not imagined in the dark, they were built from it, using obsidian as their skin. Each fragment of glass found in these temples carries more than artistic purpose. It is evidence of an ancient understanding that to know time, one must first learn to hold light and shadow in the same hand. The temples of reflection still stand, silent under centuries of dust, their obsidian buried but unbroken. When sunlight passes over them, even today, the black stone answers with a brief, cold shimmer, reminding us that the earth once built its observatories not from metal or glass, but from its own cooled fire. Echoes beneath the earth. Beneath the great cities of ancient Mesoamerica, networks of tunnels and chambers stretch into the volcanic ground, dark spaces where reflection and silence replace light. These were not accidental cavities. They were built with purpose, carved and lined by hand, designed to mirror the heavens from below. Archaeologists studying these labyrinths have found something extraordinary. In the absence of sunlight, the builders recreated stars, horizons, and even constellations using nothing but firelight and obsidian. At Teotihuacan, the most famous of these spaces lies beneath the Pyramid of the Feathered Serpent. When Sergio Gomez and his team entered the sealed tunnel in 2003, they expected a burial chamber. Instead, they found an artificial cosmos. The walls glistened with pyrite and obsidian dust, reflecting torchlight like a field of stars. Along the corridor were hundreds of small spheres, each coated with reflective mineral paste. When light struck them, they glowed faintly, giving the impression of motion. At the tunnel's end stood 3 chambers, arranged in a triad, possibly representing the heavens, earth, and underworld. On the floor of the central room, scattered obsidian mirrors were found facing upward, as though watching the ceiling. The effect, Gomez later said, was like walking inside a constellation. These subterranean spaces appear again and again in ancient architecture. Beneath the Pyramid of the Sun, another tunnel extends nearly 100 meters. Though largely collapsed, fragments of obsidian have been found embedded along its length. Chemical residue shows traces of soot and resin, suggesting the use of torches during ritual processions. When reconstructed with low light, the tunnel's curvature matches the path of the Milky Way as seen from the Valley of Mexico. Scholars suspect the builders intended to mirror the sky underground, a symbolic reversal in which the dead traveled beneath the earth as the stars moved above it. In the highlands of Oaxaca, at Monte Alban, similar tunnels run beneath temples and plazas. Early explorers called them serpent roads because of their winding paths. Many of these corridors were partially filled with obsidian flakes, swept in during ritual cleaning. One chamber contained a deliberate mosaic of obsidian pieces set into the floor, thousands of fragments arranged in a spiral pattern. When illuminated by a single flame, the reflections rotated slowly across the surface. It was a visual echo, the illusion of motion created by light striking irregular glass. The people who built it understood that darkness could amplify the smallest flicker into something cosmic. The Maya took this principle even deeper. Beneath their cities lay natural sinkholes known as cenotes, water-filled caves used as portals to the underworld. Divers exploring the sacred cenote of Chichen Itza have recovered hundreds of obsidian blades, mirrors, and ornaments. Many were found lodged into the limestone walls, placed deliberately at intervals. Underwater, they shimmer when caught by torchlight, as if forming constellations in the depths. The arrangement suggests that priests may have descended into these spaces, carrying mirrors to communicate with deities believed to dwell in the underworld. Reflection, once again, became the bridge between worlds, light on water, standing for the sun upon the sea of creation. In 2010, deep beneath the site of Caminal-Juyu in Guatemala, archaeologists uncovered a network of tunnels extending from ceremonial platforms toward a nearby volcano. Inside one chamber, they found a row of standing stones faced with polished obsidian. The alignment corresponded to the rising of Venus, a celestial body central to Mesoamerican astronomy. The discovery reinforced a pattern. What was observed in the sky above was reproduced beneath the earth. These were inverted observatories, built not to look outward, but inward toward the unseen forces that shaped the surface world. The acoustics of these tunnels also reveal intention. Sound behaves strangely underground, echoes multiply and bend. In the obsidian-lined corridors of Teotihuacan, a single whisper can travel great distances. Modern researchers have noted that rhythmic chanting produces harmonics, causing low frequencies to resonate through the walls. This may explain historical accounts of voices from stone. Ancient participants walking these paths would have heard their own chants return to them altered, deepened, multiplied, a sensory confirmation of the divine. The use of reflective materials underground was not unique to Mesoamerica. In Anatolia, obsidian fragments have been found in the subterranean city of Derinkuyu, placed in wall niches alongside lamps. The arrangement suggests they were used to amplify light in narrow passages. Similarly, at Çatalhöyük, small mirrors of volcanic glass were buried beneath house floors, possibly to protect or connect with ancestors below. Across cultures, the pattern remains. Beneath ground level, humans sought reflection, not illumination. In 2018, ground-penetrating radar beneath Teotihuacan revealed new anomalies, large voids extending beyond known tunnels. Preliminary imaging suggests circular chambers at regular intervals, as if forming a map. Researchers believe these may represent celestial coordinates translated into architecture. If confirmed, it would mean that the city's builders inscribed the cosmos beneath their feet, using the geometry of stars to carve stone. The deeper archaeologists dig, the clearer it becomes that these societies viewed the earth itself as an extension of the heavens. Temples rose toward the stars. Tunnels descended to meet their shadows. Between them flowed the reflective stone obsidian that allowed communication between the two realms. The same glass that formed knives and mirrors also formed the framework of belief, turning geology into theology. When the tunnels finally sealed through flood, collapse, or ritual closure, the light went out, but the memory remained trapped in the black surfaces. Modern visitors who descend into these spaces often describe the same experience. Torchlight bending against obsidian, reflections appearing where there should be none, an uneasy sense of depth. It is not difficult to imagine how ancient participants interpreted the effect as a sign that the underworld was alive, responding. Above ground, the ruins appear silent. Below, the echo lingers, an old vibration that once joined the rhythms of human breath, firelight, and stone. In these buried corridors, reflection becomes echo, echo becomes time, and time returns the light it swallowed. The obsidian cities did not end where the sky began. They continued beneath it, mirroring the heavens in darkness. The forgotten engineers, across the ruins of obsidian cities, Teotihuacan, Caminaljuyu, Monte Alban, and beyond archaeologists, continue to find artifacts that defy easy explanation. Flakes shaped thinner than paper, edges straighter than what modern machining could produce, and mirrors with curvatures that suggest an understanding of optical geometry. The people who created these were not random artisans, they were engineers, operating under a system of knowledge that has long since disappeared. To understand their precision, it helps to begin with the material itself. Obsidian, though often called volcanic glass, is not uniform. Its hardness lies between 5 and 5.5 on the Mohs scale, softer than quartz, but harder than steel when measured by sharpness. When struck, it fractures conchoidally smooth, curved, and predictable. This property made it ideal for controlled shaping, but also extremely brittle. One wrong movement, and the work shattered. The engineers of Mesoamerica, however, achieved a level of control over this instability that modern craftspeople still struggle to replicate. At the Sierra de las Navajas, quarry near Pachuca, signs of advanced extraction techniques remain visible. Narrow trenches follow the direction of glass veins, indicating that miners understood internal fault lines. Instead of using brute force, they applied heat and water alternately to crack the stone in controlled ways. Scorched residues along quarry walls confirm the use of fire setting, an ancient method of thermal expansion, followed by rapid cooling to fracture rock. Yet the precision of these fractures is astonishing. In some cases, long blades exceeding 30 centimeters were split from a single core without a single irregular break. When obsidian reached workshops in Teotihuacan, it passed into the hands of specialists. Archaeologists call them lapidary craftsmen, but their operations resembled laboratories. Within small, organized rooms, they worked by natural light filtered through thin openings. The tools they used, hammerstones of basalt, bone presses, wooden levers, were simple, but the skill was extraordinary. To produce long prismatic blades, they struck cores at precisely calculated angles, each flake removed with a single press. The result was a blade so uniform that when placed edge to edge, the entire set formed a perfect spiral pattern. This sequence has been recreated experimentally only a handful of times in the modern era. Modern materials scientists studying these blades under scanning electron microscopes have noted their surface polish and symmetry. Some edges show parallel microgrooves consistent with rotary grinding, yet no known Mesoamerican tool could have rotated at such speed or stability. Others suggest that the effect may have been achieved through oscillating hand pressure, repeated thousands of times. The outcome, however, rivals precision lathes. The crafting of mirrors reveals an even deeper level of engineering. To achieve optical curvature, artisans ground obsidian over concave stone molds, often basalt or diorite. By applying fine, abrasive slurry volcanic ash mixed with water, they gradually shape the glass into a near-perfect bowl. Once polished, these surfaces produced magnification and focal convergence measurable by modern standards. A mirror from Oaxaca, examined by researchers in 2014, revealed a curvature radius of 1.2 meters, precise enough to focus sunlight into a narrow beam. Whether this was accidental or deliberate remains debated, but the evidence points to deliberate experimentation. Further discoveries strengthen this conclusion. In 1999, excavators at Tula unearthed a cache of unfinished mirrors, some broken mid-production. The break patterns suggest internal stress relief, as if craftsmen were testing how much heat the glass could withstand before warping. This implies an understanding of thermal behavior in silica materials, a kind of proto-materials, science conducted centuries before the formal study of glass. The engineer's skill extended to mass production. In workshops near Otumba, tens of thousands of identical obsidian blades have been excavated, all cut at consistent angles and sizes. Experimental archaeology has shown that to produce such uniformity requires pre-calibrated templates marks on the cores that guide the striking angle. These marks, visible under microscopic study, form concentric scoring patterns that could only be achieved through measured, repetitive practice. Each strike was part of a system, a controlled rhythm, rather than a random gesture. Some archaeologists, like Anne Cyphers, have proposed that obsidian workshops functioned under strict hierarchies. Masters oversaw apprentices, regulating technique and quality. The transmission of skill likely took generations. Inscriptions from later Aztec codices refer to the Itzcuitlpalti, literally, those who awaken the stone. They were said to possess secret knowledge given by the god Tezcatlipoca. The phrase may be mythic, but it also describes something practical: the power to make glass obey intention. Curiously, evidence suggests that these engineers also experimented with combining materials. Near Puebla, a small cache of composite blades was discovered obsidian fused with volcanic pumice and bound by resin. The method produced a more flexible tool, less prone to shattering. Radiocarbon dating places them around 800 CE. It is the earliest known attempt in the Americas to create a laminated composite, a concept not formally reintroduced to human engineering until the 20th century. The precision achieved by these forgotten craftsmen is mirrored in the absence of written manuals. Their knowledge was tactile, embodied, passed through touch rather than text. When their cities fell, so did their systems of apprenticeship. The obsidian tools left behind scalpels, needles, and mirrors remain silent records of minds that solved mechanical problems without machines. In modern laboratories, researchers continue to study their techniques. Replication projects at Mexico's National Institute of Anthropology and History have shown that even with modern measuring instruments, achieving the same uniformity of edges demands months of practice. The artisans of Teotihuacan did it daily, likely by feel alone. One researcher called their work micro-engineering before mathematics. Standing inside a museum display case, a polished obsidian mirror appears like a relic of art. Under closer inspection, it is also a scientific instrument, a product of geometric reasoning and material control. Each facet, each curve, was a decision guided by knowledge now mostly lost. The engineers who created it left no formulas, no diagrams, only perfection frozen in glass. The black sheen of obsidian hides the fingerprints of these vanished minds. Their reflections remain precise, cold, and exact, reminding us that long before the age of metal or machines, the earth itself taught its children how to carve light. When stone remembered fire, the earth that gave obsidian its beauty also carried the force that would erase the cities built upon it. Every workshop, temple, and mirror of black glass was born from volcanic heat, and in time returned to it. Across Mesoamerica and beyond, the remains of obsidian civilizations are layered under ash, fused stone, and charred walls. The same fire that made their craft possible was the one that ended it. In the Valley of Mexico, traces of this duality are everywhere. The Sierra de las Navajas, whose slopes supplied Teotihuacan's obsidian for centuries, is itself the frozen skin of an ancient eruption. The mountain once glowed from within, its molten core feeding rivers of glass that cooled into black ridges. Over time, the people who lived in its shadow learned to mine it to harvest flame made solid. Yet the geological quiet they depended on was fragile. Volcanic cores do not sleep forever. Around 535 CE, something changed. Layers of ash, found within the upper strata of Teotihuacan, coincide with evidence of internal conflict and sudden abandonment. The same decade saw a global volcanic event traced through ice cores to a massive eruption, likely in the tropics that dimmed the sun worldwide. Crop failures and social unrest followed. Within Teotihuacan, fires burned across the Temple of the Feathered Serpent and surrounding compounds. Excavations show melted obsidian stuck to walls, fused like wax. Whether this was caused by rebellion or natural firestorm, no one knows. The irony remains: the city of glass was undone by the return of heat. Further south, Caminalju in Guatemala suffered a similar fate. Its proximity to the Agua and Fuego volcanoes placed it directly in the path of repeated eruptions. Around the 3rd century CE, a major ashfall buried much of the city's lower district. In the layers above, archaeologists found broken mirrors and distorted obsidian blades heat-warped, their sharpness lost. Yet the inhabitants rebuilt, incorporating volcanic rock into new walls, as if acknowledging the inevitability of destruction. Even in ruin, the material of their undoing became part of their architecture. The most catastrophic eruption in Central America's recorded prehistory came centuries later at Ilopango, in what is now El Salvador. Around 539 CE, the volcano exploded with a force estimated at 7 times greater than Krakatoa. The entire region was buried under tens of meters of ash. The Maya cities of Copan and Chalchuapa were suffocated in silence. In the layers that follow, obsidian artifacts reappear only slowly. For nearly a century, the networks of trade that connected the region vanished. The glass that once moved like a river across Mesoamerica stopped flowing. Yet the people who survived learned to interpret fire as a cycle, not an ending. The Zapotec of Monte Alban built shrines atop old lava flows, placing obsidian offerings within cracks. In one chamber, a series of burned figurines was found encircled by blades, arranged like sun rays. To them, volcanic destruction was not chaos, it was renewal. The gods of fire were also the gods of creation. The obsidian they formed was proof that light could return even from catastrophe. In 2021, geologists analyzing volcanic glass from around the basin of Mexico discovered microscopic layering inside obsidian samples, thin bands formed by repeated heating and cooling over centuries. These bands act as geological memory, recording each pulse of eruption like rings in a tree. The very material that shaped civilization still holds within it a record of the forces that ended it. When studied under polarized light, each layer glows faintly, marking a moment when the mountain burned again. Similar cycles unfolded across the Pacific. In the highlands of Papua New Guinea, Obsidian from the Talazea region fueled toolmaking for tens of thousands of years. Each eruption buried the workshops, each recovery renewed the craft. In that rhythm lies the same pattern seen in Mesoamerica: creation, destruction, renewal, stone remembering fire. Even the myths reflected this memory. In Aztec cosmology, the world was destroyed and remade through fire 5 times. Each sun ended in flames, only for a new one to rise. The god Xiuhtecutli, lord of volcanoes, was depicted holding an obsidian blade, the symbol of both death and rebirth. His temples contained bowls of ash mixed with crushed glass, offerings meant to cool divine heat. The cycle was eternal. Civilization itself was a single heartbeat in the pulse of the earth. When archaeologists uncover burned layers beneath cities, they find melted obsidian fused into strange new forms, half glass, half stone. In some ruins, shards have curled like petals, their surfaces rippled by ancient heat. These are the fingerprints of the planet's breath, a reminder that the same substance once wielded by artisans can liquefy and erase their work. The earth creates mirrors, then turns them dark again. Modern volcanologists studying these sites have noted that nearly every major obsidian culture existed within volcanic belts. The choice was deliberate. The builders sought the material that defined their identity, even though it placed them in constant danger. Their proximity to volcanoes was not ignorance, it was reverence. Living near fire was living near creation. At dusk, when the light fades over the ruins of Teotihuacan, the black glass scattered across the ground still glimmers faintly. Each shard reflects the sky it once measured, but it also holds a deeper memory, the red of the molten core from which it came. The forgotten engineers may have understood this paradox more clearly than we do, that every tool, every mirror, every city is only borrowed from the volcano. In the end, obsidian returns to heat. The fire reclaims its own image, closing the circle between stone and flame. The civilizations that mastered it did not disappear entirely. They were absorbed back into the same element that gave them form. When stone remembered fire, history turned to glass again. The Black Archives. In quiet museum vaults and climate-controlled laboratories, the legacy of obsidian rests behind glass, the same material it once was. Shelves hold thousands of blades, mirrors, and cores, each tagged with numbers, coordinates, and thin paper labels. They are fragments of volcanoes carried across centuries, now catalogued and studied in silence. Yet in these dark archives, the old stone still speaks. Every surface preserves not only the memory of its maker, but also the conditions of the earth that shaped it. In Mexico City, the National Museum of Anthropology holds one of the largest obsidian collections in the world. Its storerooms contain artifacts from every major Mesoamerican culture: Teotihuacan mirrors, Zapotec knives, Maya ornaments, and Aztec blades. Technicians in white coats inspect them under magnification, recording edge angles and fracture lines. Many of these objects are so thin that they must be supported by acrylic frames to prevent bending under their own weight. Under fluorescent light, the glass looks inert, but when a beam of natural sunlight passes across its surface, reflections awaken brief, silver flashes that hint at its former life in fire. Scientific study of these relics has accelerated in recent decades. At the Universidad Nacional Autónoma de Mexico, researchers use X-ray fluorescence and neutron activation analysis to determine each artifact's geological fingerprint. Every volcano produces obsidian with a unique chemical signature. By mapping these signatures, scientists can trace where each object originated, reconstructing the ancient trade networks that once spanned thousands of kilometers. The results form intricate lines of movement between mountains and markets, rivers, and cities. A single mirror from Copan may point to Pachuca. A blade from Belize may trace to Ucario. What was once invisible commerce becomes a visible web of human connection. Elsewhere, in laboratories across the world, curators study obsidian's optical properties. When light is passed through thin slices of the material, interference colors appear: green, violet, and gold bands formed by microscopic impurities. These hues reveal temperature variations at the time of formation, allowing geologists to reconstruct the exact conditions of the eruption that produced it. In this way, every artifact functions as both a tool and a geological record. The same mirror that once captured a human face now records the breath of a mountain. In 2016, the British Museum performed detailed reflectometry on John Dee's famous shoe stone, the black mirror used in Elizabethan scrying. The test confirmed its composition matched obsidian from Mexico's Pachuca region. 400 years after Dee stared into its surface, the mirror revealed the precise mountain where it was born. To the Aztecs, that same material had belonged to Tezcatlipoca, the smoking mirror deity. To the English alchemist, it was a window to heaven. To modern science, it is an artifact that links two civilizations through one volcanic seam. Across the ocean, in museums from Berlin to Tokyo, obsidian collections are undergoing similar re-examination. Curators now see these objects not as isolated relics, but as evidence of a unified global technology, the human mastery of fracture and reflection. Comparative studies between Mesoamerican and Anatolian obsidian reveal convergent techniques: pressure flaking, heat treatment, and mirror polishing, performed with different tools but identical understanding. The earth provided the same challenge, and distant cultures answered in the same way. Not all archives are in museums. In the highlands of central Mexico, descendants of the Otomi and Nahua peoples still keep small obsidian pieces wrapped in cloth, stored in wooden boxes beside family altars. They call them Itzpitl, the Black Heart. These stones are rarely shown to outsiders. Some are fragments of ancient mirrors. Others are blades found in fields after rain. Elders say they bring protection, not because of superstition, but because they remind the family of continuity, the link between mountain, ancestor, and home. When the sun touches their surfaces, they flash for an instant, then return to shadow. In that brief shimmer lies both memory and recognition. Modern technology continues to uncover what ancient artisans understood intuitively. Electron microscopy has revealed that the edges of obsidian blades are almost molecularly perfect straight lines, separated by less than 1,000th of a millimeter. Engineers now study these natural structures to design sharper surgical instruments and precision optics. Some laboratories experiment with synthetic obsidian composites, attempting to reproduce its fracture qualities in controlled conditions. Yet none have achieved the same effortless sharpness as the ancient craftsmen with their stone and bone tools. Digital archives now preserve every detail of these artifacts. Three-dimensional scans capture microscopic scratches, polish gradients, and curvature. High-resolution models are stored online, allowing researchers to rotate and measure objects that once lay buried for millennia. In these virtual vaults, obsidian exists again as reflection light translated into data. The circle closes. What began as molten glass reflecting fire now reflects information. In one corner of the Teotihuacan Research Center, a single obsidian mirror is kept under controlled light. Visitors are allowed to view it only through glass to prevent oils from dimming its surface. When the overhead lamps dim for preservation, the room fills with a faint image, the mirror reflecting itself in the display case. Two black circles facing each other, separated by centuries. What these archives reveal is not only the sophistication of ancient craft, but also the continuity of curiosity. The same impulse that led a Teotihuacan artisan to polish a mirror until it caught the sun now drive scientists to measure its reflectivity in nanometers. Between them stands the volcanic stone, unchanged. Each artifact in the Black Archives carries both silence and light. Beneath labels and catalogue numbers lies the record of a world that once saw reflection as sacred science. The mountains that produced these objects have cooled, their fires dormant, but inside every shard remains a trace of heat, geological, human, and unforgotten. The return of the mirror. In the 21st century, the black glass that once shaped empires has begun to return not as relic, but as medium. Across laboratories, workshops, and studios, Obsidian has re-emerged as both art and instrument, its surface once again catching light and thought. Modern science studies its precision. Artists pursue its silence. Descendants of the ancient miners still cut it by hand in the same mountains that birthed their ancestors' cities. The cycle that began in volcanic fire continues, now under electric light. At the foot of the Sierra de las Navajas, near the town of El Paxil, obsidian mining never truly ceased. Local artisans descend into narrow shafts where veins of glass still gleam beneath thin layers of dust. They use tools nearly identical to those of Teotihuacan hammerstones, wooden wedges, and woven baskets. From these mines, the stone travels to Pachuca and Tulancingo, where families who have worked the trade for generations carve it into mirrors, jewelry, and blades. In some workshops, small furnaces have replaced campfires, but the rhythm remains ancient. Strike, listen, polish, reflect. When asked why they still use the old methods, one craftsman simply said, "The mountain prefers them." Modern architects have also rediscovered obsidian's properties. In Mexico City, new buildings incorporate thin plates of volcanic glass into facades, creating surfaces that absorb daylight instead of reflecting it outward. The effect is quiet, almost invisible, yet it carries a lineage stretching back 2,000 years. At the National Autonomous University of Mexico, the Geology Department's new research pavilion features an obsidian wall facing the courtyard constructed from fragments gathered at historical quarry sites. When rain falls, the wall darkens and reflects passing clouds, a deliberate echo of the temples at Teotihuacan that once shimmered after storms. Artists treat the stone differently. In 2018, sculptor Javier Marin unveiled La Piedra que Sueña, the stone that dreams. A massive installation of polished obsidian panels arranged in concentric circles. As visitors walk through the space, the reflections multiply, dissolving their outlines into the glass. Marin described it as a conversation with silence. To many who viewed it, the work felt less like art and more like memory, an echo of ancient plazas where obsidian caught sunlight and shadow in the same frame. Scientists, too, continue the dialogue. In optics laboratories, obsidian mirrors are now studied alongside early telescopes as part of the lineage of reflective technology. Engineers at the Instituto de Física have tested ancient mirrors for their ability to focus infrared light, finding that some pieces rival early bronze instruments used in Renaissance Europe. What began as sacred reflection has re-entered the language of physics. Meanwhile, indigenous researchers and cultural conservators reinterpret obsidian not as artifact but as living science. In workshops across Hidalgo and Oaxaca, community programs teach younger generations to craft small mirrors and blades using traditional tools. The focus is not commercial, it is ceremonial. The act of shaping obsidian is treated as an education in patience, balance, and respect for material. As one instructor explained, we polish not for shine, but for understanding. The mirror is once again a teacher. At the same time, modern technology returns the favor. High-resolution scanning and 3D modeling now allow archaeologists to study ancient mirrors without touching them. Digital reconstructions show how sunlight would have moved through Teotihuacan's temples, bouncing off black surfaces to mark time. These simulations restore lost light to ruins, revealing how architecture once interacted with the sky. In the process, the mirror reclaims its function, connecting the present to the moment of creation. Even space science has found a quiet link. In 2022, researchers from the European Southern Observatory compared the surface structure of obsidian mirrors to that of modern telescope mirrors coated in silicon. Both share microscopic smoothness within nanometer tolerances. The comparison was poetic as much as technical. The same principles that guided Teotihuacan artisans polishing volcanic glass now guide astronomers polishing lenses to look deeper into the cosmos. Reflection, once an act of devotion, remains the key to seeing. Among descendants of Mesoamerican peoples, obsidian has also returned to ceremony. During the spring equinox at Teotihuacan, small gatherings form near the base of the Pyramid of the Sunday. Participants carry round mirrors wrapped in cloth, unwrapping them at dawn to catch the first light. For a moment, the rising sun spreads across hundreds of black circles. No words are spoken. When the light passes, the mirrors are covered again. It is not reenactment, it is continuation. In modern museums, curators increasingly choose to display obsidian in low light, letting its darkness dominate the space. Visitors often see their own faces reflected in it, pale and floating. The material reverses the usual direction of vision. One looks into stone and sees oneself as passing shadow. The ancients may have felt the same. To gaze into obsidian is to see time condensed to meet the memory of fire, cooled but not extinguished. The return of the mirror is not resurrection, but recognition. Obsidian has never vanished. It simply waited. Beneath cities and glass towers, beneath soil and ash, it remains what it always was, molten thought solidified. Humanity shaped it once to understand light. Now it shapes light to understand itself. In laboratories, temples, and mountain workshops, the black glass still performs its oldest task, recording the meeting of fire and reflection. In that meeting, across thousands of years, the mirror endures. Its surface changes hands, but not purpose. It has watched volcanoes rise, cities fall, and machines replace touch. Yet when held under a beam of sunlight, it behaves exactly as it did in the hands of its first maker, silent, dark, and exact. The return of the mirror is not a discovery. It is a reminder that everything humanity builds in brightness begins and ends in the glow of cooled fire. The story of obsidian is the story of reflection itself, of how ancient builders, miners, and artisans transformed volcanic fire into instruments of light. Long before steel or glass, they shaped this black mirror to measure the heavens, heal the body, and speak with their gods. Today, their legacy still gleams in the fragments scattered across the earth, reminders that technology is older than we imagine, and that every innovation begins in silence, with observation. If this journey through the lost obsidian civilizations left you thinking differently about the past, help us keep uncovering more forgotten worlds. Leave a like to support our research, subscribe for new deep explorations every week, and let us know in the comments which ancient mystery you'd like to see next. Until then, keep your mind open, your curiosity steady, and your light reflected in the dark.